Good afternoon, everyone. We are already 5 minutes late, so clearly I'm not doing a good job as a moderator and a timekeeper. Welcome to this Telco Cloud breakout session. My name is Buckland, and I'm a principal analyst at STL Partners, and it will be my pleasure to be your moderator this afternoon. So in the next hour and a half, we'll have two presentations, two 10-minute presentations, and two panels, and we'll wrap up at 6 o'clock. So we have, as I said, a fairly packed program. In the first presentation, I will be describing what the state of Telco Cloud is today, and then Pompeo will be explaining why telcos need to have the right tools to be able to observe and manage the Telco Cloud. And in our panels, we will be hearing from our panelists the difficulties of migrating and managing the Telco Cloud, and also whether Telco Cloud, which is the virtualization of network functions, are migrating, should be migrating, will be migrating on the public cloud. So without much further ado, I will start with my first presentation on the state of Telco Cloud. So as I said before, I'm a principal analyst at STL Partners. We are an advisory firm based in the UK. We are focused entirely on the telecoms and technology sector, and we're looking at new areas of growth for telcos. So how telcos can draw new services from non-connectivity based services, both to the consumer and the business segments. So we'll be looking at things such as edge computing, private networks, sustainability. And the practice I work in particular, is, as I said before, focused on Telco Cloud. So why do we think that Telco Cloud is something we want to advise our customer on? And that's because we think that it's a financial step for telcos to be able to offer innovative services. So without Telco Cloud, we probably wouldn't be talking about edge computing, we wouldn't be talking about network slicing, and we probably wouldn't be talking either about network APIs. So in this very short presentation, which is based on our research, I will be showing you what the state of the Telco Cloud is today, based on our database and excerpt from our reports. So I think there's no better way to show the activity of something by extracting data from a database. And we have been observing Telco Cloud since 2017, and we maintain a database of Telco Cloud deployments. So we are tracking live deployments in commercial networks of virtualized network functions and their underlying infrastructure. And I love it when lots of people are taking photos of my graphs. So we are interested in trials, we are interested in POCs, but what we're actually tracking are real live deployments. And as you can see, there's an interesting shape to that curve. And I just want to say that we are actually starting tracking in 2017, but obviously virtualization started before. The first entries are from 2009. And we have about, from memory, I think we are tracking 1,200 deployments in the database. We have 2,000 entries, so one entry is virtualized network functions. We're tracking 200 operators, 200 vendors, pretty much every country in the world, and 120 network functions. But obviously, in those network functions, there's a very long tail of network functions for which we haven't got that many deployments. I also forgot to say that these deployments are publicly announced deployments. So at the beginning of the period, or rather the beginning of the period that I'm showing here, so towards the mid to the end, 2010s, we have lots of deployments to do with SDN and SD-WAN. And then we have an increasing proportion of the deployments which have to do with core deployments, essentially. So around 2017, 2018, those would have been for the virtualization of the APC and the IMS. And then from 2019, an increasing proportion of those, obviously it's not detail that you can see on the graph, but I can tell you because I know the data. There would have been a flurry of deployments of the 5G non-standalone cores. So obviously in Western countries first, and then gradually across the globe. And then you can see obviously a peak of that activity in 2019, 2020, and then going down. We still a fair amount of activity for core deployments, which are being, a higher proportion of which is being for 5G standalone, but it's still not the majority of the deployments so far, despite what you might think from reading press releases. So just to be absolutely clear, a deployment makes it in the tracker, as I said, if it's live or if it's announced to be live. So we're not predicting deployments as such, but if an announcement is made in the year, we will assume that 18 months later, the deployments will come live, and that's when it's entered in the database. Also interesting to note the varying size of the edge and access deployments. Well, obviously, especially after 2019, 2020, this has very much to do with the virtualization of the RAN, so Cloud RAN, virtualized RAN, or Open RAN. And also interestingly, you can see that the 2023 bar, which, so this graph, just to be clear, was published in August 2023, is data announced, deployment announced until the end of June 2023. We were predicting mid-year that there would be up to 99 deployment in 2023, but in fact, by the 30th of June, only 19 were actually live. So you can imagine how many of those 99 will actually become live by the end of the year. And that's what we've observed in 2022. We had lots that we thought would be stable for 2022. They didn't become live in 2022. We pushed them back by 1 year. And there's a fair amount of that going on, which is because of the delay, mainly in the 5G standalone deployments and obviously in the Open RAN deployments, as I think most people in that room are probably aware of. And there can also be a certain amount of operators reported less, perhaps because it's less newsworthy, because the 5G standalone deployments tend to be sometimes on a very small scale. I personally don't believe this. I think it's simply because they basically haven't launched. It's as simple as that. And I have a question at the back. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, so I think we're going to have to get your mic.
Hello.
Hi.
Are the figures here including the public cloud deployments, or by Telco Cloud are you included private and public cloud, or only private cloud?
No, that's only in the macro network.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said.
Hi, Emma. Just a quick question. Actually, two questions. When you have on the y-axis the number of deployments, they just represent a specific announcement with an operator. They don't actually have correlation to the size of the deployment, do they?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it could be one site, it could be 1,000 sites.
Okay, because that, if you do factor that, it'd be fascinating to see if you guys do have the data, what that would do to the shape of the curve, especially when you factor some of the recent edge deployments, because they are massive scale compared to what's been done in the last 6-7 years. The second question, which I hope doesn't provoke a flurry in the room, is when you say Telco Cloud, what's your definition of Telco Cloud in the context of this data?
Yeah. So it's virtualization of network functions and underlying infrastructure. So it's looking at network workloads, okay, if that answers your question.
Got it. Thank you.
So just here very briefly, because I'm sure most of you will be familiar with those sort of discussions, but I just wanted to do a sort of quick reality check of what Telco Cloud did promise and what it had actually brought. So on the left, it has delivered on some of its promises. Lesser cost or lower costs, depending on how you actually count your cost, because there's possibility of pooling resources, so more efficient use of resources, and also operators can buy COT servers rather than expensive dedicated infrastructure. It was supposed to bring in a multi-vendor environment, which certainly for the virtualization of the core has happened. and lessen the vendor lock-in, because it's a solution where the software is decoupled from the hardware, and the solution itself is delivered through the software. It's a more flexible way of delivering applications with a shorter time to market. And in general, it's easier to deploy new capacity, and it paves the way to automation. So these, I think, are not particularly controversial. We've had, interview with operators, and that's the sort of benefits that they have observed. But it's also creating new problems. So the virtualization layer itself needs some resources that weren't necessarily factored in initially. There are issues of parity of performance and parity of energy consumption. We still have, certainly in the RAN, large vendors still dominating, and if you look at the silicon layer, there's basically in Open RAN one main vendor. So it's not really a multi-vendor environment here, which obviously can create its own problem. The big one obviously here is more complexity. So the operators might have less dependence on their vendor, but then they might get a higher dependence on system integration. They also need to operate legacy versus virtualized networks. And I think finally something which probably was overlooked initially, to operate virtualized network, and increasingly as those networks become cloud native, there's a need for an organizational change as well within telcos. Not just a need of upskilling, but that's also an important one because the technique keeps changing, but just a different way to operate. So I think the way in which an operator goes about virtualizing is pretty much it's one model for each, but and by which I mean there's various ways of virtualizing, but we have sort of captured it into 4 main models, which we call pathways. So although it goes from the left to the right, I don't necessarily want you to infer that one is better than the other. I think what is best depends on the operator's circumstances. So on the left-hand side, that's what we have pathway 1, where essentially the network functions are virtualized, but the solutions are still provided as a single stack. There isn't really any pooling of resources, and in terms of hardware, it's still a proprietary hardware. There isn't really any interfaces here. So if you were going to put names of providers on the various boxes here on the left, you probably would have the same name for all those various layers. So from pathway 2 onwards, we are getting into a multi-vendor type of environment. With an increasing involvement by the operator into actually doing its own system integration. So pathway 2 is what we call the vendor-supported best of breed. So we have disaggregation of the solution. We have the beginning of horizontal layers, as you can see. So we have a COTS hardware layer on which there is a horizontal telco cloud, usually a private telco cloud, and a virtualization on top, usually VM-based, and then a number of network functions running on top of that, which can be provided by various different companies. But it's usually the lead vendor or system integrator who does the integration. And then the next one, the pathway 3, it's similar with an increasing proportion of the network functions being cloud native. Some of them can use the public cloud, and it's the operator doing its own system integration. That's why we call it the DIY best of breed. And the difference with pathway 3 and pathway 4 is that all the network functions are cloud native, so they can run virtually, they can run in theory anyway on any infrastructure, on the cloud. Although in practice, as we know and we'll discuss a little bit later, that cloud still tends to be a private cloud. So when we sort of came about with this model, we thought that most tier 1 certainly and lots of operators would be pathway 2 or pathway 3. But I think in reality, a lot of them are still, well, I shouldn't say are still on pathway 2, some on pathway 3, very, very few on pathway 4. So on pathway 4, we'd have typically Dish and AT&T for certain workloads. So this is my next slide, and that's to sort of give background to the second panel we'll have this afternoon. So here, I just want to have a quick synopsis of the state of the migration of workloads to the public cloud. So here, as you can obviously see, I'm not just looking at network workloads, I'm looking at the workloads that are happening at an operator. And they have different level of maturity. So the IT workloads have been moving to the public cloud for a while. It's fairly mature. So, I mean, a bit less mature, but still fairly mature are the OSS and BSS, and increasingly the analytics and AI ML, for which the hyperscalers are a very good tool. The next candidate to migrations are the one in the middle section, so enterprise application, network edge, and on-prem edge, for which the hyperscalers are to some extent being tested by the operators. The operators are getting a feel as to whether they can work with the hyperscalers on those sort of workloads. For the next move, which is potentially moving the core workload, and that's something which I think has never been done, which is the RAN workload. So these ones, the network workloads, are obviously not yet mature. And I think that's the end of my presentation, so I will give the floor to Pompeo, unless there's any question. Thank you very much. So you're familiar with that?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hopefully you had your coffee today, because I like to tell stories. So this is going to be about a story about observability. Observability, for some of you, we're going to bring in the observability concept from another layer of aggregation in the data we collect. That's the point of view that we're approaching observability for Telco Cloud, of course. So this is the main challenge of today, is darkness. So we don't see anything at all. We can sleep, of course. If we sleep, you know what happens. So I like to remember a metaphor, the cave metaphor, and every single network is a cave, black cave. So some tools, they give you a lantern. Could be a vendor, technology, and then you start seeing things on the walls in this cave. Could be a network function, could be a virtualized environment, and then you have the first tools. You walk through this cave, and then you start to see specific network functions. You start monitoring metrics. You start to see, disaggregation, decoupling, all these terms that we like to speak out loud in this type of venues. But do we really see the whole picture here? Okay, how do you protect assets if you don't see it? How do you automate if you don't have an inventory or a catalog to take components and make a pipeline at least? How do you do all these fun things that we like to do from the OSS layer? So this story is about this. Turning on the light, having observability for any type of a disaggregated network. 5G is introducing a concept, a requirement from the infrastructure point of view, which is cloud native infrastructure. We all know these things. So before telling you how we put together a couple boxes and how we see observability from entity data, I would like to have a give back message to the tip that allow us to develop one of the tools that we use in our approaches and the services. It began in 2019. These guys over here were very good at coding, the Meta guys, and we knew a little bit about telco. So we were giving the advisory on what type of process they could do with this code. And we were given a challenge in an AS from a neutral host subgroup or group. So we were given a challenge of a network inventory, open source, license-free for a neutral host, with some of functionalities of ticketing and workforce management. That was the task. And we did it. We implemented it in LATAM. Then something happened. This asset that we use for the real implementation was given to us, okay? Not given, the responsibility to maintain it. So you have this car with small wheels. It doesn't go over 30 miles per hour, but you park it in your garage. So what we did was, let's start tune, pin my ride. That's what we did. So we started to develop this concept with vendors. We started to use it for Catalyst projects. So this journey began. All these concepts were put into the challenge to see how the industry was responding to this. So we began with a Catalyst in 2020, which we won a recognition there. And then we have done over 8 Catalysts just in that part. But that's something even better happened. We started to promote it and respond RFPs or specific requests using this approach. So we started to put some lines in the code since we were maintaining this. So we started to get some part of the OSS ecosystem given to us as a work streams. Resolve this, automate this, make a fulfillment, deliver one-click service. So we started to be given all these requests from tier 2s, tier 1. It started with fiber costs. And then suddenly we were working with tier 1 operators. So now this kid got really big in terms of work, at least. So we have been developing this asset, and we don't charge for this asset in terms of license. We developed this asset, and it became a cloud-native function, and it's cloud agnostic. The first implementations run in hyperscalers, and we're promoting massive discovery process on private clouds. So we give a lot of functionalities, and we take it to the Telco Cloud, since we have the openness for and the capacity to do federation of the information, the APIs. We have developed connectors. We have been able to close the relationship between the software and hardware and connect to more environments. And of course, we appreciate what the cloud vendors are doing in terms of giving through APIs whatever they can see. Because sometimes whatever they can see is an isolated part of the network, but not the whole network. So you have 2 providers, 2 Telco Cloud providers. They will give me different readings of their part of the networks. So it cannot be resolved at that level. I think we were in another session with Luis, and he mentioned something that we need to stack the layers on the Telco Cloud. So we put this resolution in a higher level, at the OSS level, by standardizing the information we get. We create these intelligent events. Let's simplify it, having a data lake of the information from extracting information of vendors. And then what we do with that, I don't know, what is the request? Could be a visualization, could be a correlation between domains. It could be like you mentioned, OpenStack version X virtualization environment, or a cloud native, a CAS. And you can get different metrics, but you can standardize that metrics for the customer request in the different domains. So this story gives us 6 countries in 3 regions, 9 commercial deployments so far. And each part, this asset, with a combination of a data-driven architecture, everything is open source here. We have a next-gen OSS task and capabilities that allow us to do observability in the next level. So I'm not talking only about how to deploy, trying to standardize a deployment day 0, day 1, but how to run operation from an observability point of view. So we have integrated this service ecosystem, and I repeat, it's a service ecosystem because the asset was given, and we have developed, and we use it to resolve problems. So it's not a product, it's an asset, can be used to resolve. This is the approach, and this is what we bring to our customers or to our partners when we need to resolve Telco Cloud management and observability. This is a glimpse of what it began with an inventory platform. Now we have developed SMO FCAPs, assurance suites, performance management, fault management, SQM. We have developed network slicing and orchestration capabilities. We have integrated modules for ML IOPS as well, and automation workforce. And we're using the Symphony platform, which was the name of the solution, as a visualization for this type of solution. Observability, from this point of view, needs to be achieved by a standardization of what we collect. So the concept is very simple. We need to put a lot of work into extracting, processing, and make the data useful. It's not the same thing as, monitoring that observing. So guys, try not to feel, try not to be asleep. Let's turn on the light. For the vendors, keep doing what you're doing, bet on the openness, that things can be resolved, an easier path for the CSPs and the ecosystem. Some takeaways here. The solution, since it was given birth in a collaborative environment, it remains in collaborative environment. So if you want to understand more of this solution, the repo is there. So we welcome you to give us some challenge or to add different type of requests on this. It's a cloud-native function. It's a CNF already, as I told you, no license fee, and it's a modular solution with AI models incorporated. So with this, if you want to take a look, we have some demos that we put together for you and to experience, or whiteboarding and architecture of those deployments. We cannot disclose the operations, but we can talk about how we do to resolve observability requests. So thank you very much. Hope you like the story, and let's continue with the Telco Cloud Summit. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pompeyo. I think that's a great introduction to our panel, which is on Telco Cloud migration and management. So I will be calling my, can I count? Yes, 5 panelists to the stage. So we have Luis Velarde. I actually need to make my screen a little bit bigger because my eyesight is not what it used to be. Luis Velarde, the head of cloud and infrastructure at Telefónica. Please take a seat. Maybe start it from the left. Pompeyo Soto again. I hadn't actually announced you, Pompeyo. I'm really sorry. Open Network Director at Entity Data. Gil Hellmann, VP Telecom Solution Engineers at Wind River. Ignacio Gonzalez, in charge of business development for media and telecoms in EMEA for Red Hat. And Steven Spellicy from VMware, VP Service Provider Marketing. Thank you very much. So just a housekeeping comment. There's 6 of us and we have 6 mics. So that doesn't mean that we can't take any Q&As, but we'll need a little bit of logistics for the Q&A. So we'll try and keep the session to 30 minutes, a little bit shorter than before because we are running late, and run some Q&As after the session. If you have a burning question, please raise your hand and we'll sort you out. So we've had a lot of introduction already to Telco Cloud, so I think I'm going to go straight into the weeds by asking again if someone would like to give his definition, and I have actually a candidate in mind, his definition of Telco Cloud and what the characteristics are for Telco Cloud. And I think you know who I mean, Luis. I think I would like to start with you because we had some interesting conversation in the preparation for this panel.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Thank you for having us here. Okay, the definition of Telco Cloud. I think we can define it as the arrangement of resources that underpin the services and applications of a telco operator. Not only network functions, all the software from the telco operator, all the IT and network systems. The new services that are coming, that are enabled by use cases such as 5G, slicing, the edge technology, and the coming of Open RAN, imposes two very specific requirements to the infrastructure. One is being dynamic, being on demand, and another being distributed. And this is in order to meet with the latency and the response time expected by these new services. So the infrastructure needs to show some characteristics there to meet these requirements. Needs to be multi-site, that is being distributed. Needs to be hybrid, as it was commented before, because some of the functionality could be in the public cloud environments and some in private cloud environments. Don't know, maybe this is to be discussed, but maybe some control part could be more in the public and some data user part is needed in the private part. So it needs to be hybrid. That's another characteristic. And another characteristic is being cloud native. Because in the end, this arrangement of resources is a pool of resources that will be common for all the applications. We will have a lot of hardware, let's say, that is going to be a pool to be shared by different applications and services and network functions. So being cloud native, this pool of resources can benefit from the principles of a cloud native architecture, such as providing scalability, providing elasticity, so guaranteeing all together that we will have enough capability for all the resources. So scalability, elasticity, provisioning on demand via APIs, which is a very important element and it has been commented as well. And finally, mobility, the capacity to move an application or some software from one side to the other when needed. So this portability is also another important element. So finally, the characteristics of a cloud native, of a telco cloud is being multi-site, hybrid, and cloud native.
Thank you very much. So I don't know if any of my panelists want to add anything on that front, perhaps on the cloud native bit and maybe the difference between cloud ready, cloud native.
Well, to me, there are plenty of definition about what is cloud native, but more than the definition, because there are many, it's about what do you need to find in terms of characteristics. And to me, it's a service-based architecture, microservices. It doesn't mean a lot if you put a container inside of a VM or a VM inside of a container. You need to do something slightly more sophisticated if you really want to get this flexibility. It has to be open APIs. It has to be like that, otherwise it's not really what we want to achieve here. Sometimes you have seen about this DevOps approach. Mm-hmm. To me, it's about automation. End-to-end automation could be another element that you need to have there. And then we can open the debate about how it's going to be this transition from virtual machines to containers. I think right now it's more about Kubernetes and containers rather than VMs, but we know that we need to survive with both for a while. That's for me in terms of the characteristics that you need to find rather than the definition.
Thank you. Anyone wants to add anything?
For us, as an SI, since we don't, we need to follow some guidelines in order to deploy. When we get this, the deployment guideline or the artifacts in order to deploy that over an infrastructure is where we really see if it's cloud native or not, mm-hmm. based on the files. Because we have received software that is claiming to be cloud native, and it's not cloud native, it's cloud ready, let's say that. So really when you perceive in the code that it has sensibility on the infrastructure that is going to be deployed besides just the requirements of a specific components very close to the hardware, then it would be a cloud, it's a good indication of a cloud native, such as not having a management assistance in order to do the life cycle management mm-hmm. of it. That's an indicator, because you can have like you exposed before, you can have a CNF deployed on a virtualized environment. So it's the real nature of the artifacts that will tell you if it's cloud native. It's sensitive of the cluster we're going to be deployed, and they can do the self-healing capabilities and scalability. That will indicate it's a cloud native.
Thank you.
I would echo that. you can have all the right cloud native infrastructure in your network, but if the vendors that you use, the network equipment providers and ISVs that make the network functions, are not following cloud native principles, to your point, you're gated and limited by that particular factor. So you could deploy that CNF on that perfect infrastructure, but you're not going to gain the benefits of agility and programmability of which cloud native is known for.
So I would like to challenge a few things here. So very smart stuff and correct, except that I feel that sometimes we over-rotate on this whole definition of cloud native, especially when it comes to radio access network.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with a situation where you have basically a cell site, single server, and more than this, the location of the workload is critical. Like there is a reason why the VDU it's located there and it's not located in, let's say, 100 kilometers or miles away because latency requirements. And I'm not even talking about hardware accelerators. So there is this whole debate of, let's say you can do it with software only solution. Let's assume this, okay? Because there is evolvement. Traditionally, if you look all the way to our phone that we're holding, hardware accelerators always proven to be more efficient, both power as well as cost. Okay, software is more flexible, but it's not as efficient. So when you're looking at a very large scale, okay, and we're hearing about TCO, energy efficiency, challenges, and then we're looking at stuff like cell site, for example. If you do massive MIMO and you need to have a lot of densification in a certain area, in many cases it's a cell site solution, or you don't have enough dark fiber, so you cannot create baseband pooling, SIREN sites, then you can almost be bounded to the fact that it doesn't matter if it's microservices and containerized, you will not get cloud native.
Mm-hmm.
So I do hear a lot of operators sometimes without really paying attention to this or going down to the details saying, oh, I want a cloud native solution. But actually what you're looking to deploy, the use case, by definition, would never be able to be cloud native. Maybe never, it's a strong word, but it's like you, at the same time, looking at the cost, you're looking at other restrictions. So something to think about.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point, you're right. Perhaps if we look more at the core, it is the case that we are, at the moment, with the solutions that are on the market, we might want to have them cloud native, but they're not quite cloud native. So I just wonder if someone could perhaps describe how we go from where we are currently to where we might want to be. What are the things that might be needed in terms of initiatives? Or so first, maybe what are the main challenges from getting where we are to where we want to be, and then perhaps in the next set of questions we can look at the tools, the ways.
Okay, I can take this one. So I think in order for the Telco Cloud to succeed, we need three elements. One of them is that we need the stacks to be ready and incorporate the capabilities required by the applications, because not all of them need the same thing, but we need the infrastructure to be valid for all applications. So the stacks may be ready. For instance, for the case of Open RAN, we may need support in video specific hardware for synchronization. So supporting this or the PTP protocol is a specific characteristic. So we need, first of all, to have the capabilities incorporated in the stacks that claim to be cloud native. Also accelerators are needed, also enhanced security, also optimization of the energy consumption, because in a distributed environment, we need to optimize the energy consumption. So this is the first part. The second part is that the applications, so the workloads that are going to be deployed in these sites need to be cloud native, meaning that they need to be capable of deploying in different sites, not be attached to one specific configuration, but allow portability, so being capable of deploying in different environments, because we will not have the same stacks and the same vendors distributed in all the topology. So we need the stacks to be ready, the applications to be cloud native and promote portability, and we need also to have the right the right systems or tools, because this multi-site environment and multi-vendor environment and this diversity introduces complexity, adds complexity, so we need to manage that. So we need to somehow be standard in the definition of cloud native and the management of this environment. And to do this, there are initiatives out there. One of them is Silva. Silva is the open source solution within the, well, open source project within Linux Foundation that tries to address these challenges in two ways. On the one side, creating a Telco Cloud reference stack, incorporating these capabilities in a vendor agnostic mode. And on the other side, providing a validation platform so that the providers can demonstrate, the application workload providers can demonstrate they can deploy in a reference stack as a reference to a cloud native stack. So these are the elements that I think we need to succeed with Telco Cloud.
Thank you.
I would like to suggest some provocative comments.
Don't look at me then, look at your fellow panelists.
But I would say we need a business. Okay, so if you look at let's say traditional RAN site, okay, and you're looking at Vera and Oran, okay, so, and don't quote me exactly on the percentage, but about 65% it's the RAN application, 15% it's called it the cloud layer, and about 25% it's the hardware. Traditionally, you go to your traditional RAN provider, partner, and they provide the whole solution. Now you're basically saying, I want to, have more vendor diversity so I can reduce my cost. Great, okay. I want you to be cheaper, okay. And essentially I want to give you less money, okay. But I'm not, so I'm not introducing to you, how you can make the missing part is 15, 25% that I'm taking away from you. And by the way, on the 65%, again, there is more competition. I will probably even looking to reduce the whole thing, okay? And, so we keep talking about TCO reduction, it's all great, but at the end of the day, there are very few RAN vendors that provide their solution, okay? And we're relying on them to open the interface to enable this. And we're not providing the business, it's basically a balloon squeeze rather than growing the pond, okay, or the cake share. So we're not providing them how to make the missing revenue. What are the opportunities? And I think as long as an industry, we're not going to look at this and say, okay, we're going to get more competition, so the RAN part itself will be cheaper, you'll have more option, but what are the revenue opportunities for those companies to make up this loss? I think we can see it in all the standards and the open source projects, but at the end of the day, it will just be all kinds of delay and tactics that are being played, because we're basically saying that there is a RAN ecosystem like 5 or 6 vendors, okay, that are viable, and we're asking them to give a big part of the revenue without seeing in the future how they can gain more revenue. I think if an industry we work together to look more how we can basically work together to bring use cases that can allow a service provider to monetize the network, because a lot of operators spend billions of dollars to build a 5G network. But I know as a consumer, I will not pay, I actually not paying more money to my service provider for the 5G connection. So how they are going to basically get a return on investment from 4G to 5G?
So are you saying, Gil, essentially that if everybody has a bigger business and monetize 5G, it will benefit the operators, and by ricochet, it will also benefit the RAN vendors, and everybody will be happy?
Correct.
I think
I agree.
some people might want to challenge, I'm not sure, going through my panel.
The point is, it's true that all the operators are trying to reduce the TCO, but I think the most important thing is how we can create networks that are more efficient. And here is the debate for me, right? So we have an establishment right now with NEPs that's what we need to challenge. Telcos that need to challenge. Anyone who knows a little bit about radio access network, they know that what is the average utilization of our radio sites daily? maybe 2 or 3 hours per day are over 60%. The rest is over under 50, and during the night even lower. If by any chance we create this Telco Cloud, telcos can create this platform, and they can start saying, okay, I'm going to buy you NEP, your carriers, and I'm going to deploy these carriers in real time, wherever I need it. You are killing part of this waste of not used resources that we have today. That's one of the things that I do believe it could help, and from my point of view, it will help to. It's not just about reducing the TCO, being cheaper. Is about more how you can help them to use those resources in a much better way.
I totally agree with you. What you're describing, it's baseband pooling, okay? Japanese operators are doing it for 4G, in 4G with purpose-built equipment, so you don't need to really go cloud for this. Yes, cloud provides some benefits for it, but the main reason why you don't see baseband pooling as pervasive as you'd like, it's because Japan has dark fiber everywhere in the ground. Many places, if you look at the transport network layout and how they lay their network and what fiber they have in the ground, it's just not feasible for them unless they put significant investment in this area.
True. Second step is neutral host. Wherever you cannot centralize, because you don't have fiber, you share. And you share one infrastructure, doesn't matter who is managing that, and on top of that, you deploy the different workloads.
Sure.
So this is the kind of,
also.
no, I'm not saying that I'm inventing the wheel. The wheel is there, but I'm trying to make the point in terms of how we can convince telcos that this Telco Cloud, when it comes to the Cloud RAN, the Open RAN, the vRAN, whatever we're going to call it, it might help them to reduce this TCO. Because, again, I have heard many times that Open RAN should reduce the TCO around 30%, period. Okay, let's try to achieve that among all of us, because this is the only way that we are going to be able to.
Correct. We can help them, it's easily, but the RAN vendor themselves, how they get the money back for the part that they're losing.
So if I can just intervene here, let's ask the RAN vendors how can they make the money back, shall we? We've got 10 minutes left. I have to say that the panel has gone in a direction completely completely different to what I had in mind, but that's fine. Stephen, I think you wanted to perhaps add one thing, and then we can maybe go back on track and discussing perhaps what the tools can be to help us to become more cloud native. But Stephen, I don't want to. We've got 10 more minutes, and if you have questions, just have them ready.
And not to belabor, but I think the point of your original statement was around Silva and the fact that it's an operator-led initiative in order to build the construct of Telco Cloud. But I don't think we should be talking as much about what is Telco Cloud, but rather why we need Telco Cloud. And really the construct is back to your point as well, which is freedom. It's about freedom of choice, selecting best of breed through disaggregation. The core, we have been disaggregating both with NFVI as now with cloud native infrastructure with Kubernetes. We'll continue to disaggregate, and that's good. And your point on the RAN, I think we're not there yet from a deployment perspective. I know that many of the operators want to do Open RAN, but reality is we are very early in the life cycle. But in core, it is a reality. And operators interested in disaggregation and virtualization and using containers to virtualize their core, or containerize their core, so they can gain more freedom. Silva is a great example. Nefio, on the automation and orchestration side, more of a vendor-oriented organization, but still with support of the operators, in the purpose of driving more standardization to give you more freedom. And I think that's the key. It's not what is Telco Cloud, it's why do we need Telco Cloud? It's for your benefit, ultimately.
Okay. For us, of course, having lower TCO is good, but having this freedom also allows flexibility and also helps accelerating innovation and providing new services that the customers may benefit and may create additional business.
So that was going to be actually one of my questions, so thank you very much, Stephen, for bringing it on the table. Sort of going around the panel and saying, yes, why do we want Telco Cloud and why do we need Telco Cloud? So perhaps, Luis, you've already given your answer to that question, and Stephen to some extent, so have you. So Pompeo, I don't know if you want to add something.
Well, in terms of a challenge, we
we begin any type of implementation based on what domain. So basically, I agree on that position, because you have a different type of deployment models based on what domain you are approaching. So it's not the same thing to make a disaggregation of the core that what needs to be taken care of when you deploy an Open RAN. So those are different battlefields and approach, and even the technology. Probably these guys here have different type of technology arrangement for different type of network function. That's true, right? So it will depend on what domains we want to approach and insert the Telco Cloud practice there. So this is why the SIs are valuable.
Thank you. Gil, do you want to add anything else?
No,
Please don't be controversial.
No, I agree about the reason why you're virtualizing, you're disaggregating all the way to the cell side. It's to create the flexibility to bring those applications that will allow you to monetize the network. And this is critical. Without it, you cannot get to this point. Yeah. But like I said, as an industry, we really need, I would challenge us to think about those use cases and working together to bring them, because this will accelerate the whole thing. Otherwise, like I said, it's just a balloon squeeze, and especially we're talking about relative compared to the enterprise, okay, or even the hyperscaler. It's a very small ecosystem. Okay, if you count in any area, it's the very small number of applications. So we need to work together. Otherwise, we can't rely on the RAN vendors to open the interface, because without this, it's not going to work. For the RAN vendors to go all in, and then we're not, looking at how we're going to everyone benefit from it.
But when you say working together, what exactly do you mean in practice?
So, for example, specific use cases, and creating use cases working across, not just the telco, but other areas, like, for example, vehicle to V2X, for example, okay? And look at the whole thing as holistic and work together to create those type of things. So if you go to a service provider, to the CEO or the CFO, they really don't really care too much about ORAN or not. They look at the numbers. And the biggest headache that they have, it's how I can operate more efficiently, but above this, how I can actually get a return on investment and profitability of the billions of dollars that I paid on the spectrum and I paid to build the network.
Okay, fair enough. Nacho, anything else?
Nothing from my side.
So we have a very reactive panel here. So I would like to encourage the floor to ask a few questions. We might have a few minutes for any questions, if anyone has any. No? So maybe it's time to thank you all very much for a very lively conversation. That went a bit off track.
We'll keep talking after.
I'm sure you still got lots to discuss. Thank you very much, all of you. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's going to be a movement of chairs during which we can take breath. I'm just checking the room actually to make sure that all my panelists have arrived. Yes, I think they are all here, so that's a good start. So our next panel is the utilization of the public cloud. And we have 3 panelists. The first one, Sameh Naguib from AWS, Global Head of Telco Cloud Business and Development. We have Vivek Shada, SVP and Global Head of Telco Cloud at Rakuten Symphony. And last but not least, we have Victor Bal, Technical Microsoft Fellow and CTO at Microsoft Azure for Operators. If you want to make your way to the stage. Oh, we do need another one still for me. So good afternoon, Victor. Good afternoon, Sameh, and good afternoon, Vivek.
Good afternoon, Emma. Hello, everybody. I think, are we the last panel?
We are the last panel, yeah.
So we're between you and tapas, coffee, cerveza, whatever. So bear with us. We'll be with you shortly.
Okay, so we've just been seeing that there's a number of implementation of virtualization on Telco Cloud, either purely on a private cloud, a hybrid cloud, or a mixed on public and private. So in this particular panel, we are going to look at whether it makes sense for the workloads, the network workloads, to move on the public cloud. So in the context of private to public cloud migration, what workloads are being impacted now, and which workloads do you see as being impacted in the future? So I have sort of given a little bit of a spoiler to what I think, which workloads are being impacted, but I would like to ask the panel, and any of you might want to start first. So I'm interested in the now and what you see in the future, and perhaps also how the operators themselves are envisaging that migration, the timing of it, and if they see it sort of compartmentalized network-backed workload, if for them it's more of a continuum.
I don't mind starting and giving a little bit of color to first, what are the typical drivers we see operators evaluating when making these choices. Rakuten Symphony had an unfair advantage because we were born out of Rakuten Mobile. We could afford to take silly decisions at that time, and everybody was saying this is going to fail. Here we are today. Yesterday was a pivotal moment for us. Those of you who watched Iago, he elicited a very interesting response from one of the biggest detractors in the past of ORAN, saying they are committed to ORAN. So we're very heartened that we've been able to light a little bit of a fire. But coming to the question, Emma, specifically, I think, and I will generalize a little bit because there are certain differences based on geographies and jurisdictions. The first question that a lot of operators are asking when they are considering what they should be migrating to a public cloud environment is the viability of an OAM environment to do that, even before they investigate, is the vendor ready? Because we have some of the biggest telecom operators in Europe in this room. They have enough leverage that they can actually help change the direction and at least accelerate the roadmap for some of the vendors. But even before they go there, I think some of the characteristics that Louise pointed out in the previous session, they are now becoming an integral part of a precursor, a pre-screen, saying, if I do move a certain workload to the cloud, can I operate, maintain, upgrade, lifecycle manage it in a way that is relatively consistent with my operating model? Because bear in mind, you build it once, but you run it for the next 7 or 8 years. So the TCO actually comes from the OpEx as well. So that's, I think, the first thing. And the second thing, which is around a bit of a TCO calculation is, and I think you alluded to it in the last session, is the control plane, the data plane, because there is a different metric when you go to the public cloud in how you have to commercially engage and sort of purchase those services versus if you're doing it on-prem. And that's a bit on the commercial. And last but not the least, I think there's things around data sovereignty, et cetera. What am I comfortable and what does my legislation allow me to do that? And I think the public cloud providers, and I'm going to seg you to both my panelists here, I think they've done a fantastic job, especially in the last 3 years, helping address some of those concerns because they weren't necessarily technical concerns, they were regulatory concerns around data privacy, et cetera, and sovereignty. And I think the cloud providers have done a pretty interesting job in how quickly they've been able to address some of those. So in our opinion, the move to the cloud, you've actually kind of already revealed it on that one of the interesting slides a little bit on the maturity curve. IT functions are a given. The traditional CIO role solved this problem 8 years ago, arguably, in the virtualization context. From a telco application perspective, BSS is the next obvious target. A lot of it, CRM, charging, mediation, billing, it's almost there. We see very few instances whereby that cannot be moved. Some examples, for example, in Europe are to do with data encryption in motion. Again, it's a technical answer to the problem. Core is beginning to happen. Core has been virtualized for a while, but core moving to public cloud is now beginning to happen. You've got providers like Working Group 2, et cetera, who've done an interesting job, at least to address MVNOs or Tier 2 operators. I believe Cisco's acquiring them.
Yep.
So that's a testament, and AWS might have something to say for it. Then you start looking at the less sort of well-addressed ecosystem of network functions, which are typically the CTO domain now, outside of core, I mean. And that also is, we're seeing a fork in how the CTO community is looking at that stack, because if you're just comparing a like-for-like 4G network, that is a little bit more understood as what it might look like if you attempt to take it to the public cloud. But if you're doing anything on 5G, O-RAN or not, if you're disaggregating your network, that stack is now a lot more potentially multi-vendor than you've been used to in your operations environment. And that then brings you back to the OAM challenge, the lifecycle management, et cetera. So I think that's a little bit of a, what are the drivers, what are the questions, how we see the spread, and I don't know if Samir and
so maybe before we actually move to Samir, you mentioned something about something that the hyperscalers had done on the regulatory side of things, and I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what you were referring to here, so I'm just interested in picking on that point.
So there's always, every time, and I'm on the same side as the vendors now, right? So every time you try to do something provocative, which is different, there's always the bogeyman saying why it cannot be done. It's a natural instinct, right? It is inertia. And in this particular instance, what I was referring to, and Europe had the lead role to play this, less so the Americas, that you cannot use public cloud for telecommunications infrastructure because there's a significant burden of responsibility for data privacy, regulatory concerns, and they're right. But that did not mean that the problem cannot be addressed in a reasonably elegant manner, which isn't cost prohibitive. And on that front, I think, I mean, cloud is a very large, public cloud especially, if I may, is a very large beast. It offers a plethora of services, right? For them to be able to, as a set of hyperscaler providers, zoom in into this one particular problem, and within 2 to 3 years come out with meaningful solutions, which I think the operators are starting to lean into. I think that was really nice to see, because it usually gets lost in the noise otherwise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think when we talk about, your question was which workloads are moving to the cloud,
yeah.
And you're specific about the network. So actually, we need to look at this from two angles. The first angle is why even move any workloads to the cloud? Like when you look at when AWS started cloud in 2006, the main driver for enterprises to move to the cloud were two things, in my opinion. The first one, increasing innovation, the speed to innovate. In cloud, you have a large platform, you have all the tools that you need to innovate, create new services faster. And the other reason is always reducing your TCO. And reducing your TCO relates to many things. Relates to the nature of workloads. Are they cloud native? Could you leverage cloud elasticity and all of that? They also relate to facts like, for example, you mentioned that there are certain workloads like user plane workloads and networks that have different characteristics, right? So if you map this to the network, you need to look at which parts of the network could actually benefit from the cloud. So you talked about core network, for example. Core network, for the most part, is virtualized, and we have many vendors right now who even moved into the cloud-native journey. Obviously, it varies across the spectrum. So the more you have workloads that can benefit from elasticity, from pay-as-you-go, from unpredictability, from the fact that you could have consistent utilization during the day and then scale out and scale in and all of that. When you have these kind of capabilities, you will naturally see more workloads moving to the cloud. And we have been seeing this in the core. When you look at the RAN, for example, it's more distributed. It has special acceleration requirement, but also one fundamental problem with RAN virtualization or cloudification, it has been mixed to a great extent with Open RAN. So when you go to Open RAN, there are the challenges of interoperability, performance, open questions, whether, of course, some suppliers have been already able to meet this requirement, but still, you have this ORAN challenges, and then now suddenly you mix it with the cloud challenges or with the virtualization challenge. So this is one dimension. The other dimension is you shouldn't look at network cloudification from just the lens of network workloads. At the end of the day, communication service providers, they run networks, but they also have large enterprise and IT workloads. So when we look at this from AWS perspective or from any hyperscaler perspective, we see it as a continuum of workloads. And this is why we like to talk about cloud continuum, because the more you leverage the public cloud, the more benefits you get. First of all, you develop the skill set, you know how to optimize your workloads, how to manage your cloud. Actually, you get the FinOps and all of these things. So when you start your IT journey and you see the benefits, and then you move into core, now moving RAN into public cloud, you could actually start realizing benefits that you may not realize if you are only doing RAN. For example, everybody talks about elasticity, but elasticity is not the only benefit of public cloud. Another key benefit of public cloud is automation. You could do automation at scale. Now, if you start unifying, for example, your automation, your observability, your management across RAN, core, IMS, OSS, BSS, and IT, suddenly you realize benefits in terms of your people, the skill set, the tools, and all of that. So we like to look at it at a journey from IT to OSS, BSS, to core, to RAN. And we like operators to see it from this perspective because this is where they start getting a lot of benefits. And I think right now we are at a stage again where the core is already moving to the cloud. We are past this point. And the question is, when is the moment when it will scale? And then we are starting to seeing some RAN movement to some shapes and forms of public cloud, but I think it's early days for RAN cloudification.
So before we move on to Victor, I just want to make a point. I mean, I can see why at AWS you want operators to see it as a continuum, because if they start moving their workload and they see it as a continuum, it all ends up on AWS. But anyway, perhaps we'll move on to that point later. Victor, I don't know if you wanted to add something at this point.
I mean, these guys pretty much covered pretty comprehensively the answers. The only short thing I would say is that in the last panel and now, we talk about sort of like, cloud, telco cloud, or cloud. Part of it is just the OpEx reduction and CapEx reduction, and then the other one is revenue generation. Yeah. And not much has been said about that. You mentioned edge computing a little bit. I think the hyperscalers are very well positioned to generate that new pieces of revenue for the operators. And so then the workloads then tend to be just the usual stuff that you have for telco. But in addition, you have automation, as you said, management, and then additional things on the edge for applications that are also kind of neglected, but actually one of the most important aspect of why you want to go into cloud. So the rest, I agree with everything that was said.
It's an interesting point about obviously the revenue generation. So can you give me again a concrete example of where it would be a good idea to move workloads on the public cloud for revenue generation?
Yes. So I'll tell you a story. So I wrote the first edge computing paper in 2009. It was the first paper anybody did. And I presented this to the Microsoft SLT. So that's the SLT is the CEO, who was Steve Ballmer at the time, and his direct reports. And they did like it. So then I got engaged in all these discussions with all the technical fellows and the distinguished engineers and things. And they started to talk about like the cloud being within 20 to 30 milliseconds of 85% of the GDP paying population. Now, when you have that kind of a thing, then the question is like, do you need the edge even if you have the cloud? So it became clear to me at that time that this is going to become religious in terms of like one position versus another. So I had to show them where the money was. So then I embarked on a thing which all of you now know as video analytics. So that was 2014. And till 2023, we did a number of proof of concepts, ideas. We got many national awards. We got many cities, try to use it. But Microsoft as a company did not push that forward. And part of the reason, and I don't know, this might change later, but part of it is that some of these hyperscalers think of themselves as platforms and not solution providers. So the DNA of Microsoft is very much is that you succeed if your partners succeed. So if there are partners doing this sort of thing, then your platform succeeds and everything else is great. So that's one example that I do think that video analytics, instead of pushing it all the way to clouds, you kind of want to do it on the edge. And you can imagine the number of cameras that are out there. I mean, there are millions and millions of cameras in China. There's so many in the UK. There's so many. You're from UK. In the US, there's so many, and nobody's watching the video. So you kind of like have to do the analytics, and we have all the capabilities of doing all of that stuff. So that's just one example of many other examples as well that can be used. And I do feel that the operators are in the right position to do this because the definition, the way 3GPP is defined with the near edge and the far edge and the distribution thing, it's built in. I mean, it's the edge component is built in. But now when you talk to the operators, you start to realize, well, they don't have the power or the energy, or they don't have like the geography, or they don't have sort of the space for putting the service. But these problems, I think, are very solvable, and this is how, and they can start to sort of like generate revenue from that. One example.
Okay, no, that's very useful. Thank you very much. So maybe coming back to you, Sameh, about this idea of seeing the migration of public cloud from the operator's point of view as a continuum of services. I just wanted to ask you what sort of traction you see from operators about moving their workload to the public cloud. And when we were discussing preparation for the panel, you were saying it depends a little bit how mature those operators are in terms of their 5G deployment, perhaps, and the investment they have made in their own private telco cloud.
Yeah, I think the maturity here and where the operator is in the journey is very important. So if you look at 5G, when 5G started and when the first early adopters started to deploy 5G around 2019 timeframe, back then public cloud was not ready for any network workload. I mean, let's be realistic. There are requirements around features, capabilities, around performance, around locations. The whole idea of putting the cloud in the edge 5 years ago was not like today. So these early adopters already made investment. They already deployed cloud on either private cloud on-prem or get vertical stacks, and they need some time to capitalize on these investments. So what we are seeing with these big operators is they look at use cases that make sense for them. So for example, we are seeing a lot of traction in disaster recovery because as 5G adoption accelerates at the user's level with new mobiles and all of that, you start adding capacity. And traditionally, operators have been investing in so much capex upfront to maintain their network at 30 or 40% utilization. So what operators are saying now, well, I continue to expand the hardware. I will stick to my existing vendor whenever I deploy on-prem. But what if I can increase my utilization and leverage the public cloud, not just for disaster recovery, but for example, for scaling during congestion, for maintenance windows and all of that. So we see a lot of traction with tier one operators who invested early on in 5G into moving for disaster recovery, scaling, and maintenance windows. We also see operators looking at IMS moving IMS to the cloud because now voice is not generating much revenue, and operators still need to maintain it. IMS, to a great extent, has not been cloudified or containerized. So now, when the hardware refresh cycle comes, operators need to face a decision. Do I invest in new hardware, or do I leverage public cloud if the economics make sense? Again, IMS, because of its nature, is primarily control plane. It resembles IT application. We're seeing ISVs who are becoming cloud native, so we're seeing a lot of traction there. And then you got, I would say, the late majority operators who are deploying 5G in the next 12 to 24 months, and now they see an opportunity for leveraging public cloud for a primary deployment of core, for example, because now you have solutions on-prem that can meet the data residency, the security, and the performance requirement. So when you look at core and IMS, this is a trend we're seeing. When you look at the RAN, it's a completely different game because even though operators deployed RAN for NSA before even core, they will continue to add coverage. But the question is public cloud ready for RAN workloads? Of course, we are working on solutions for this space, but for that, and also operators spend a lot of money in RAN, and RAN is more distributed. So I think this is a more challenging part where we are seeing operators moving parts of the RAN, like RIC, CU, for example, which resemble the core. And then we are starting the journey with them on the DU, the more distributed side. So it's a mix, depending on where the operators stand and depending on the nature of workload.
That's a really interesting question. I actually I didn't realize that the IMS, that some operators were looking at moving the IMS onto the public cloud. Personally, the migration to public cloud I have seen have more to do with when an operator wants to launch 5G SA. They, as in the few of them who actually do it with a public cloud provider, do it then. So I'm thinking of Telenet, for instance, in Europe and Swisscom, for which is very closely linked to the launch of standalone. So that's really interesting. Thank you. So another question I have in terms of moving to the public cloud is what are the other prerequisites? And I suppose one question I often get asked is whether the operators need to have automated first, or do they automate once Vivek,
I have a feeling we might get two perspectives on this, but
I wanted to ask you first.
okay.
During which I'm going to check the time, by the way. We're fine, we still have 10 minutes.
If you are considering moving to the public cloud, and this is what we've started seeing in the majority of the conversations we're having with customers, Rakuten Symphony obviously has on-prem hybrid cloud offering. We also partner with all the hyperscalers. The example Sami gave was a good one, burst capacity, et cetera. We support that. But interestingly, especially with a bigger realization happening of cloud native, and containerization, et cetera, a lot of operators are also zooming out and saying, what will day in the life of X look? And X could be any of the operators in this room or in the world. And they understand it from a day zero. How do I onboard? How do I qualify? How do I then do a day one provisioning deployment across my network? And how do I then do day two lifecycle management? Because like the famous saying goes, no battle contact survives the real world, right? When you launch the plan and it hits live traffic, things need to change within a few days, weeks, hours. And that is where I think there's a growing realization about automation is a fundamental part of by design from start, rather than we'll bolt it on later. Because what will happen if you bolt it on later, you will end up with a best endeavor mix and lose perhaps some of the capabilities that either on-prem cloud or a hybrid cloud or a public cloud is giving you. Or you will be forced into making choices which are your only choice of resort. And the network is actually the primary strategic asset of the operator, in my mind. You could all consume the same components of technologies from a variety of vendors. What you do with that technology is what makes you and your network capability unique. And RAN is an integral part of it because it includes things which unfortunately today technology cannot solve, like can you rent the right rooftop in the right location in the city, because you need to beam down from it. And somebody will get there first, and somebody will have to go to the next building, etc. These are not technology challenges. These are real-world, on-field realities of building out a network. So automation is a crucial example, and I will take a specific example. Somebody was mentioning Japan on the previous panel. Japan, as nature has destined for it, is a land that is prone to earthquakes and typhoons quite frequently. So in Rakuten Mobile, this was a design principle before they do the blueprint saying, you will have the ability organically to look at weather forecast from the OSS VSS environment without human intervention, allow a policy rule to be picked up and power down RAN sites before the typhoon hits it. Because if you've got live electricity there and the mast goes down, then there's a health and safety issue there. Mm-hmm. So this is an example where it's already real, it's being used, and it uses a form of hybrid cloud, etc. But automation needs to be part of your design thinking from the get-go. I don't know.
So in other words, it's automate as soon as you can, whether or not you move on the public cloud or not.
Before you move to the public cloud, I think you have to have a clear view on what your automation strategy and tooling will look like and what it will mean for your operations environment. You can't turn around and tell your NOC team saying, well, oops, just use 5 more Excel sheets, right? I mean, they are drowned in firefighting all the time. So I think the last thing any CTO wants to do is just impose additional burden.
Let me say a few things here. So there were many things actually that you said, and you said that I wanted to. But let me start. So let's talk about the cloud for a second. Okay, so we have hundreds of millions of servers that we manage we have 62 regions. Each region has multiple data centers. And we have over 180,000 miles of fiber interconnect. And we have millions of miles of fiber inside it. And then all the sort of the world, the financial institutes, the more retailers, everybody sort of depends on the availability of the cloud all the time. And if the cloud goes down or if something goes down, we actually have to pay money, depending on to the businesses who've lost the money. So this idea of resiliency and automation to manage this, because human beings cannot manage that level of scale. It's just not possible. It can't be done in an ad hoc manner either. It has to be very, very scientific. It has to be very well thought out. And it's been going on for over a decade, 15 years that we've been doing this. And we have refined many of these techniques. So the thing that you were talking about, resiliency, this is an old idea, like in the mesh networking days and things.
I didn't mention resiliency at all. I was talking about automation. Automation needs to be part of your design.
wasn't going to be critical of it, but all I was going to point out was that there are technologies at bear, at scale, that the telcos have not adopted, but this is a tremendous opportunity for them to adopt this. So, I was on the Monday, there was in the panel, and we talked a little bit about AI. AI is here. In Azure, we use it for many, many things, and to automate many, from the time a ticket is filed to which group inside Microsoft gets that ticket, to resolve it, to NIC failures, which is what I talked about, to many, many other things. And so that AI element can also be moved into many of these telco networks. So that's one point. One final point, and I'll pass it on to him, was that nobody has talked about this, but I do. So, you said the network is the telecoms thing. I already sort of mentioned how long and how big a network we manage, right? And that network has hundreds of terabits per second of access capacity available to you. Just like AWS started, right? They started as a retail to booksellers, and then all this excess capacity, well, we can sell it and add it to cloud. The same is true for network. There is absolutely, if you look very far ahead, or not even very far, a few years ahead, two industries are spending money on the same problem when they don't have to. You go through you have 0 to 4 milliseconds URLCC thing in the last hop. What good is that if you've got more than 120, 200 millisecond latency in the internet, which you cannot control no matter what? But in the cloud, you can actually control that because you don't rely on BGP, you rely on particular paths, and that capacity is available. So there is tremendous, tremendous advantages for the operators to think about this thing in a very serious manner, to pick up all these technologies that are now pretty well established, but not established in the telco field, utilize them, and look at how they can continue to reduce their costs by sort of offloading these things. I'll just stop there, but that's...
So, I'm not sure, but I agree 100%, and that's what I was saying. Automation needs to be part of your mindset. You can't just say, I'll go get some EC2 instances or from Amazon and then or Azure, and then say, well, now let's figure out what our tool set and chaining looks like.
In our case, servers go down all the time. I mean, all the time they go down. And we have to automatically detect ahead of time that something bad is happening, and then ahead of time be able to move workloads very quickly. In fact, one of the things that in my group we have shown is that we can move in production system with RAN, we can move workloads while things are happening in sub-millisecond or sub-second with sub-second latencies. This is technology that we have developed, built, and we are able to sort of like I said, the servers go down, and we are able to bring them up. We can re-image the servers, bring them right back up, and you have the SLA that you want. So sometimes people say, well, the IT community or whatever doesn't know 5 nines availability. You should challenge them, to say, tell me what is 5 9 availability. Do you even understand what 5 9 availability is? And they'll say, well, it's because of hardware. Well, hardware is everywhere. I mean, the server hardware is the same hardware. So it's not like that availability is not possible either. And so there is a very, very good marriage between the two industries that I think that is inevitable, in my opinion. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with both of you. I mean, of course, automation has always to be first. Whenever we talk to CSPs about moving network workloads to the cloud, the first thing we talk about is automation. So this is a given. I think I just want to comment on one point you mentioned here. We are at a transition period where the move to cloud is starting. I think in the fullness of time, like we like to say at AWS, eventually public cloud will be the preferred place for workloads for all of the reasons you mentioned. There is another point that you also mentioned about the edge and the internet latency. So one of the things that operators might not be able to see now for valid reasons is the monetization piece, and you talked about monetization. When applications are there to leverage the low latency, you will need these applications to be deployed at the edge. Mm-hmm. You will need to do inference at the edge. And if you think about it, the application providers who are building these applications build this on public cloud. So by unifying your stack and having small public cloud instances at the edge, you are actually you will be ready for monetization. We don't speak a lot about this because the applications are not there, but once the applications are there, and this is where we need not only to enable our partners, like you said, because at AWS also we work through partners. But I think we need, as an industry, to stimulate innovation in this space. Once the applications are there, people who leverage public cloud in their edge will be in a much more advantageous position because they will be ready to quickly deploy and offer this to their customers.
I'll just say one more thing. Just struck my head while he was talking. LLMs, right? There is a graph that Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, shows. And he says, how long did it take for technologies to get adopted? 500 million people. So your phone took about 16 years for 100 million people. ChatGPT took 1.5 days. So one has to think about the innovation, the way things are moving forward, and one has to embrace it. If you stick with the old sort of mind share of like in other panels I've heard people say, oh, it's very hard, or it's very complicated, or it's this. It's not. It's just, and the other thing with software design, and in the previous panel, somebody was saying that hardware is sort of like, is always better than software. That's not true either. And because one of the things with software is that the amount of features you can push out is much faster. You don't have to wait 10 years for these things. And the money, the question was, how is the money going to get, how the RAN developers are going to get the money and all? Well, the number of deployments is much larger than it was in the past. They're going to make money in volumes, and if they don't embrace it, it's kind of like Britannica. I don't know how many of you remember Britannica, but this was this, I don't know if you remember, but there were these books that were put in your house, and then everybody loved those books, and they did not change, and they were gone. So I think I'm saying it in a more dramatic way than I need to, but my point is that there are many, many advantages to embracing the cloud thing, and it's, once again, inevitable, I think.
So I had one last question, but to some extent, I think the panel has already answered it. So often when I talk to operators about why they don't move their workload to the public cloud, they always go, oh, it's because if I move my workload to the public cloud, I lose my ability to differentiate my services. So I think your answer is actually, no, you can do the same things in the public cloud that you would be able to do on your private cloud, but on top of that, you can do things that you were not necessarily able to do before, and capture those new services that are not entirely based on either coverage or capacity.
Yeah, just before I respond to this, I think it's very important for hyperscalers also to self-reflect and listen to operators, because many challenges are valid challenges. And if we don't listen to them, we will not actually fix the problems and cover the gaps. So there are very valid challenges, and this is why it has been a journey for public cloud to get where it is now, and it will continue to be a journey. But to your point, I think many operators now are realizing that the public cloud is basically a platform that you build on top of it. You could choose a different platform, but at the end of the day, you need a platform. Someone will provide you with a platform. Where you have control is where you design your network and where you go up the value chain, which is obviously becoming a cliche, but where you can innovate and create new services that would differentiate. Like at the end of the day, operators differentiate based on what? Based on, for example, coverage, which is something that will not change with cloud. But they also differentiate based on things like how do they manage congestions. You can and offer better quality of service in congested areas. You can do this much better with cloud. But where they need to think about differentiation is how do they differentiate by offering new added value services that either they build it themselves or they bring application providers and partners to build and leverage the network. And we are seeing, for example, things like API exposure and Camara also going into this direction. So I think the question of I will lose control, we are not really hearing it as often as it used to be. We are hearing more how you can help me innovate to create differentiations that I can take to my customers and be in a position that my competition cannot do.
Yeah, and get the developer ecosystem to come along in the process. Because without developers, you're not going to innovate. In fact, for years, for like decades, the revenue hasn't gone up. It's gone 8 to 9% or whatever for all the telcos because, and there is a frustration there. I've talked to many CTOs and CEOs. The frustration is that we bring the customer to the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Facebooks and Googles, and they make the billions, and we are just so. And part of the reason is because they just end up in this space and are not able to get the developer ecosystem to build in there. So, yeah, so that's important too.
Thank you. So I think we are probably up for time and probably past time. So I think Unless, Vivek, you want to add something?
No, I think just one comment on the last point that you mentioned. I think perhaps one of the reasons, I don't have a view on this, maybe we can catch up with some of the colleagues after the panel. One of the reasons we're not hearing as much that the operators are worried they will lose control, because in the last 4 or 5 years, enough experimentation has happened, enough organizational skill set has started to being built in the operators, that they now have a much better idea on how best to leverage cloud in the midterm. Long term, I think a lot more is going to happen, a lot more will be possible. There's a lot of learning happening by the hyperscalers. I think the collaboration dialogue is a lot more two-way now. I think the initial sort of Gen 1 spike into public cloud is well understood, and the elasticity, scale benefits, etc. But I suspect one of the reasons why we're not hearing as much, or the hyperscalers aren't hearing as much about the fear from the operators of losing control, is because they have started understanding how better to leverage public cloud, which means they have a much more confident understanding of what I want to do on-prem, what I want to do on cloud, and and it's a transition path. They will not stick to that mix forever. The mix might vary over the next 3, 5, 7 years.
Yeah, this is true. When Microsoft got into this business, people were very afraid that, this big behemoth is going to come and is going to just swallow things and just going to and take our business. You're right, but over a period of time, they started to understand, and as he very well articulated, it's that somebody's going to use some platform, and this is just a platform. And he was 100% right in the sense that you figure out where you make the money on the top of the platform, because platforms is just nuts and it's good for us, but for at the end of the day, it's just something that does some work, and you're going to make money on the value-added services. So that realization has definitely gone in. So yeah, you're right.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it there because we're already 6 minutes past the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.